Thank you for having me. My name's Sam. I lead the Sydney Testers Meetup group. I'm going to be talking about elements of quality that are often overlooked in the app development process. And I'm going to explore a bit of Swift UI. I feel like it's been a bit of a theme today, and I'm just extending on some of the awesome content that other people have already mentioned today as well. And I'm going to use an example app to track your poo. I'm going to call this app Bog Logger. And you can read about more in detail on this blog post. Also, if you want to access these slides later, I've got a little URL. I'll put up these slides again at the end of my presentation. And if you want to read more, feel free to reach out on the internets. But gut health is really important. If you search for gut health in Melbourne, you get hundreds of events, including a gut health masterclass coming up this Saturday. I think I'm in the wrong industry. They're charging like $220 per event. So if you do it in Sydney, there's so many more events as well, especially in the Bondi Junction area in the eastern suburbs. There's a lot of people who really care about their microbiome, their gut health. There's been studies that have linked your gut flora to things like depression, obesity, and a whole bunch of life issues. So I think we'll get to a point where you can already get your microbiome DNA sequenced these days. So if you really wanted to explore what's living inside of you, you can investigate that as well. And if you're interested in reading more about your most underrated organ, the gut by Gil is also available as an audio book or as a physical book if that's your style too. So introducing the Bristol stool chart. If you are rating your poo, there is a scale on 1 to 7, 1 being severely constipated and 7 being almost completely liquid. I hope you didn't have one of these today. If you probably wouldn't be sitting in the audience. Most people should be around a 3 to 4. If you've had one of these, that's a good day today. So on a watch UI, this is the UI I'm building for my first iteration. You have numbers 1 to 7 with the emojis and a potential skip button, being able to export your data out to share maybe with your GP or your doctor, your nutritionist, or something like that. And some considerations from a design point of view. I wanted to explore what it's like to build privacy by design. If you built with your first version some localization into your app, how does that look? If you support accessibility, and it has to be discrete. You can't have poop emojis on this UI because people still get a little bit uncomfortable and concerned that other people are going to be overlooking their shoulder while they're using these types of apps. I'm not actually going to show you the code because my dev environment is actually back at home, and I did have TeamViewer set up on this Mac to be able to remote into it. But then TeamViewer decided it would rotate the passwords on me, and I didn't commit my code to GitHub before I left Sydney. But if you do really feel like seeing some code, I've got some serverless code. I've got an API that you can hit where you can log your poo. It won't do anything just yet, but hey, you can hit an API if you like. It's there. And so I'm going to walk you through my wireframes instead. The first time you launch, you'll get displayed a privacy message. And these are things like we've had GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Act, mentioned this morning, and it's the new privacy laws applicable in Europe, but I feel like it's good practice, even if you don't collect data on natural citizens of the EU group, I think it's still good practices to try and enforce that, and I think the Australian government is working towards implementing similar privacy laws here as well. You have to be transparent about the type of data you're collecting, what type of third-party applications you use. You also have to ensure that they are also GDPR compliant too, and potentially provide links to their terms and conditions as well. And if I have a data deletion policy, I don't need to know what I pooped more than a month ago. why does my app backend need to keep that data? So I'm going to I should just flush it. There we go. And so, yeah, this is an excuse to get up on stage and talk shit. But if you automatically delete data within 28 days, you are already GDPR compliant by default. And before you get into the app, potentially accepting the terms and conditions of this. Now, some localization considerations. If you launch in these 3 languages with your first app or in future iterations, adding further languages is going to be easier. And I'll go through the reasoning why I picked these ones. The top 5 spoken languages in the world on the y-axis there, you've got native speakers in 100 million. And we've got Mandarin, Hindi, Spanish, English, and Arabic are the top 5. Now, I'm not going to choose Mandarin as my first language because I'm using Google Cloud, and the Great Firewall of China means I can't launch too easily just yet. Means I might be learning Alibaba Cloud at some point. Spanish is this part of the world. There's not a large amount of overlap. We've got the English-speaking part of the world and the Arabic part. I chose to pick Arabic as a MVP language because of the right-to-left considerations from a design point of view. If you want to see how an Android app breaks, iOS is a little bit better, but in Android, in developer options, if you enable right-to-left rendering, you'll break a lot of apps. And it's not uncommon, here in Australia for someone to have their device language to be a right-to-left rendering language. And if you do, I was considering what would I have to do to my UI for right to left, considering would I have to put all of my numbers this way? Turns out I don't have to. That one's for you, James. There you go. I even changed the background to make it better. But it turns out that number pads in Arabic have been left to right simply because of globalization. So I don't have to design a completely new UI that renders right to left. I can just render my numbers left to right as per normal. I might have to allow my privacy message to render right to left, but the number selector doesn't necessarily have to be. So you can use right to left rendering in cases, and you can choose to opt to not to use it. So I was just I was thinking too hard about the design here. And some of the quirks that I discovered with SwiftUI when I was trying to build this initially, my rating at the top, the text was cropped by the time area. And if you override that display, apparently Apple won't approve your app if you override the time display. Only Apple apps are allowed to override that. So I thought, well, how would I try to fix this? Because the screen is quite small. I thought I'll just put it in, well, I Googled how to do a scroll view and in SwiftUI. And the suggestion was to add everything in a list. The thing is, these buttons are in a horizontal stack. And if you put 2 buttons in a horizontal stack in a vertical scroll that only allows 1 item, the buttons start to merge. And there is only 1 button. And I tested this quirky behavior on both SwiftUI for iOS and SwiftUI for wearables, and then I read up on the scroll list implementation, or the list view implementation, and it is a list view of a single item. So you can't put multiple things in a horizontal row in a list view. Just doesn't compute. I raised a bug with Apple, but I haven't really heard back from that just yet. I had spaces in between the numbers and the emojis, and when I was testing it with adaptive font, large font, and bold font on the Watch OS, I got string truncation. I was getting ... at the end, and this is not a lot of real estate, so I had to remove the space to potentially get it to fit. So I'm finding tweaking SwiftUI for wearables is a little challenging. I wanted to make the skip background button. I wanted to make the background a nice orange color. But if you just set background color, doesn't follow the same shape as the button. It's actually just square. So it'll just draw a square rather than using the default watch rounded button for some weird reason. And I haven't figured out how to fix that just yet. So instead, I'm like, I'll just make the text color orange instead of the background color. We'll see how that works. If you do have a VStack, there is a limit of 10 items in that VStack. I only discovered this because my text on the watchOS wouldn't multi-line wrap. And with that privacy message, when I was trying to build out that UI, I had more than 10 strings in my vertical stack. And SwiftUI doesn't compile if you put more than 10 items in a horizontal stack. It's a little odd. You can do competitor app analysis to investigate where the gaps are. We've had someone bring up the topic today of there is market saturation, and there are other apps out there you can use to track your poo. And I don't think they've been updated in a while. I collected these screenshots a little while ago. But yeah, if you had this on your mobile device and you were really concerned about people overlooking your screen and seeing what you were up to, I mean, like, there's poop emojis everywhere here. And for some people, it's still a really delicate subject to talk about. It can be a little taboo. But there's a myriad of health reasons for why you'd want to track this information anyway. You can go through the process of creating personas that can help relate the design process. I had surgery that involved my digestive system nearly 3 years ago, and that's actually where the inspiration for this idea came about. Because part of my recovery from surgery, I needed to monitor the health of the output. People who have gone through colon cancer as well would be interested in monitoring this information, or irritable bowel syndrome is also a common issue where people are more likely to track this stuff. But to take privacy into consideration, imagine if you had a vision impaired person using this type of app. And if they were in a public toilet, you don't want to be saying, hey Siri, log a number 2 for me, please. So you've got to come up with ways that are potentially discreet and make it accessible for everyone. I'd love to do some user research with someone who's vision impaired to come up with a discreet way of being able to log your poo. The tech stack I've been using Swift for the iOS. Because of the Apple announcements recently, I was actually going to try and build for Android first, because Android supported standalone wearable apps. Even though Android doesn't have the market built up, I didn't want to build both an iOS and a wearable app just for my first iteration, just to get something out there and to learn if there's actually a market for poo tracking. But because of the announcements this year, I'm going to release the first wearable app on SwiftUI, and it's going to be standalone. I have already MySQL backend, and I'm exploring Google Cloud infrastructure, at least for the first iteration, to help support this. I'm still building out the MVP at the moment. It is generally open source. It will be across multiple wearable devices. I will be trying to learn how to build for Samsung as well, because they also have a reasonable amount of market saturation. And I wanted to use this to teach people about elements of accessibility, localization, privacy by design. I'll be looking into building out workshops for things like unit testing for watch apps and continuous integration for some of these platforms as well. And I'll be trying to live code as much of that on Twitch as possible. So that's the BogLogger pitch there. It doesn't exist on the App Store yet, but there'll be a poo tracker app on your watch at some point. If you want to access these slides again, there is the link. And I was using a course on Udemy to help me build out the UI and explore SwiftUI. I got it for like a $15, $20 voucher Udemy often do those types of promotions. I know there's also a developer on YouTube who has built the, has gone through all of the Apple tutorials on SwiftUI and has actually just gone through the coding themselves. So if you don't like sitting down and reading a tutorial, I find it hard to sit down and read content. I much prefer to watch someone build it or try to build along with them. There's lots of different resources if you do want to learn a bit about SwiftUI. Yes, and got time for questions?
Thanks so much for that, Sam. That was, I'm trying to stay mature here, that was the least crap post about crap I've ever seen. Well done. We have some time for some questions. Anyone with some questions for Sam? Yep, up there.
Yeah, more a comment. Hey, Sam.
Yeah.
The GDPR stuff was interesting and the deleting data stuff. And one thing that I've come up with some clients is that their database system doesn't allow them to easily delete data.
Yep.
So one innovative solution that I've seen other people use is to encrypt personally identifiable data.
Yep.
And then when they want to get rid of it, you throw that key away. And it's not the most private thing, but it was just a thing that crossed my mind.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting remark. You can decrypt the personally identifiable information. With my first iteration, I won't be collecting any of that data, but I will be. I've already built a little cloud management script that goes through and so I still want to collect statistics and analytics of the app. So I'm just collecting things like how many users, the number of poos, and the languages that people are generally using so that I can use those insights for further iterations. But I anonymize that data once it becomes 28 days old, I summarize it into a format that's still usable for me, but then delete the individual logs.
We have time for one more. Is there one more? No? It's the last chance to talk about poop apps. Oh, yep, there we go.
I'm just going with the theme. Did you intentionally put your foot in it? For the back end jokes?
No, the back end joke was a slip up. But there are one or two other poop jokes in there that were intentional. But yeah, people make jokes.
While we're on the topic, if you go with the personally identifiable information, can you just call it P?
Oh, P. Yeah, so we'll have P in exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Going with the theme, but if like the data and analytics you're collecting, is that going to be on a bog roll?
On the bog roll. We'll see. Like maybe version 2 of this app is vision processing, like image processing or maybe like version 2 is also Siri shortcuts. I think there's so many different elements of the iOS developer environment I can explore. I'm actually thinking like version 2 is you actually get to customize your watch OS. So if you want to change the emojis, if you actually want to have poop emojis in your poop tracker, there's nothing going to say you can customize the UI. I also don't know if the 7-button layout is the best UI. Maybe some people want a dial or a scroll view, and maybe there is capacity to have an iOS app to change the UI.
This has been the best Q&A session ever. Thank you very much, Sam. We have to move along now.
Thanks.
Everyone give it up for Sam one more time.